Well, here it is. We are now on album number 1, the KQ Ultimate 15 Countdown. It ends right here with album number 1. I'm Jason Manning. That's Sean Scramstead. And we sat around and we bandied about which should be number 1. We knew it was going to be the Beatles. We had actually discussions on which Beatles album. I'm more of an Abbey Road guy. But again, when you get to your Abbey Roads and this album, it's really hard to put one above another.
I think that this is an obvious choice. It was the number 1 album in Rolling Stone's best albums of all time. It's a pretty obvious choice, but it's just such a great album. And, you know, to talk, when we sat down and Jason and I did this back, 4 or 5 months ago, we sat down and did our list. It was really hard, and we got to this point, and we felt in some ways bad that we overlooked some things like A Night at the Opera. We overlooked some of the great. There was some honorable mentions. There
were actually, camera guy Mike Bernier. Didn't you chastise me a little bit for not having Night at the Opera in there? I think you did.
Yeah.
I think you did a little bit.
I mean, we thought about that too, and it's a tough choice because there are some great albums that we had to leave off the list. But to get it to 15. We just had to kind of... We
probably could do another list of the 15 albums that could have been on the 15. But...
Well, I think it would be interesting to do maybe a top 10 guitarists or a top 10, that kind of top 10 singers. We might have to revisit that. But this album, in my opinion, is not even... It's number 1. I mean, this has got to be the greatest album recorded of all time. It's certainly more poppy than Pink Floyd. There's no doubt about that. But I think it changed culture and it changed Western civilization. And there's even a quote in there. But let me just go through. I made a couple of notes on this. This was released June 2nd, 1967 in the United States. It was released a few days earlier in England. It's been called a decisive moment in the history of Western civilization. It was that big.
It was. I mean, it transcended so many different genres.
When the album,
culture,
the acetate came out, and somebody had a copy of it, and they took it to Mama Cass's house in Los Angeles, and they put it on at 6 a.m.
I bet there weren't any drugs being done.
Right. And apparently the whole neighborhood came over and started listening to this, and everybody was just amazed by it, right? Because they'd never heard anything like it. It was their 8th studio album. It won 4 Grammys in 1968, including Album of the Year. I mean, I think we forget how big this really was. I mean, I don't really remember this as well, and I'm really old, but I think I was 12 at the time, and I don't really recall how big it was. Some of the older kids in the neighborhood, I remember them being into it. I really wasn't. I think I was listening to the Monkees or something at that point. But anyway, so many first concept album, first to put the lyrics on the back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. First to use pop culture figures on the cover. They used 57 pictures, and they left Elvis off. You know why?
No.
Because McCartney said he's too big. He's too important.
He's too important to put on there.
We can't have the king on here. He's too important to be used in this way. Lennon wanted to have Jesus on there. That got nixed. And Lennon also wanted Hitler on there.
Now,
that got nixed.
The Jesus thing, that was after Lennon said we're bigger than Jesus, and he got all the heat for that.
I think he was trying to make a point. And so they were rejected. It was Paul McCartney's idea to do this concept album. He told George Martin, you know what? We're tired of touring. Let's just let the album tour for us. Let's create this group, this mythical group, and we'll put them out, and they'll do the tour for us. We don't want to do this anymore. Number 1, the first song recorded was Strawberry Fields.
Okay.
That did not end up on the album.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Strawberry Fields was recorded. The third song recorded was Penny Lane.
Okay.
And that didn't end up on the album either. So what happened was record company EMI came to George Martin and said, hey, we need a single, like right now. And they said, George Martin said, we're recording an album. And they said, no, we need a single right now. So he took those 2 songs, and they would have otherwise been on Sgt. Pepper, Strawberry Fields, and Penny Lane. He said it was the greatest mistake of my entire career. He said, can imagine what those songs on that album would have done for the album.
Yeah.
So anyway, those were a little inside stuff there. McCartney went back and recorded all the bass parts later. All the stuff was recorded, and then he went back later and recorded the bass parts to get them absolutely perfect. He was that guy.
That's amazing. I will say A Day in the Life is, for me, the Beatles.
That's
the Beatles' high water mark as far as anything they've ever done. Of course, you can sit there and argue that, and, I just think, personally, that's the best thing they ever put to tape.
I think that's right. It was the reprise at the end. it was it was the curtain call, right?
Sure.
And at the very end, you got this amazing song, "A Day in the Life." Even just the title is so amazing. I just think it's just a great piece of work. All the songs were so interesting. Even when I'm 64, just this return to vaudeville kind of sound. Yeah. It's an amazing album. I don't know that it wears as well, maybe as a real progressive album like a Pink Floyd or something, but it is just so. It was just such a gigantic event, really, I think, back in the era.
And it's hard to say who's better than the Beatles. I mean, it is. You can argue this, that, and the other thing, but the Beatles are the Beatles. The Stones aren't the Beatles. Pink Floyd isn't the Beatles.
Everything I saw, there's this trailer out for this Yesterday movie. By now, maybe it's out, actually.
It's out.
But I saw somebody talking about it with the film director, and he was saying, Sheeran, Ed Sheeran's in it?
Sure.
And he said, the thing about the Beatles is that everything kind of came from the Beatles. All the stuff, all of us that came after that, they were the melting pot, and everything spawned from that. We all took ideas from the stuff that they had done. So I just think there was such a huge band and such a big album at the time. I think it deserves to be number one. It's number one on our list.
There it is. The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, number one on the KQ Ultimate 15 Countdown. Brought to you by our friends at Musical Round, also Cars Complete Auto Repair and Service, Gronk's Grill and Bar, Denny's Lawn and Garden. We will be awarding that chainsaw right after the album hits the air on July 4th, which actually would be just a couple moments ago. So by now, somebody should know they've won that chainsaw from Denny's Lawn and Garden.
Congratulations.
All right, I'm Jason, that's Sean. Thanks for tuning in for the KQ Ultimate 15 Countdown.